Good evening, everyone. I know everybody's very excited. Fantastic. And thank you so much for joining us, those of you in person, and we have quite a few on Zoom as well. I'm Kate Markert, Executive Director here at Hillwood Estate Museum and Gardens in Washington, D.C., and my pronouns are she and her. And you know, as we begin, I always like to gratefully take a moment to acknowledge the Nacotch tank, also documented as the Anacostan, the Piscataway, and the Pamunkey. And these are the native people on whose ancestral lands Hillwood stands, as well as the vibrant and diverse communities who make their homes near us today. We are so pleased to have audiences joining us for tonight's program, both here in the theater and by Zoom. For those of you in the theater, you know what I'm going to say. Make sure all of your devices are silenced. Yeah, don't you be the one that, you know. And for those of you at home, you may submit questions via the Q&A function on the Zoom menu whenever they occur to you, and we will get to as many as we can. And I know there are going to be a lot of questions at the end of this talk. But we'll get to as many as we can from both locations at the end. Tonight's lecture is the final installment in the series related to our current exhibition, Fragile Beauty, Art of the Ocean. The exhibition is on view through January 5th, so be sure to come back if you haven't experienced it yet, and even if you have, it is well worth very close looking at some fantastic objects. And we hope you come back and bring a friend, or two, or six. And I hope you also will join us in a few weeks for the 12th Annual Frederick J. Fisher Lecture, featuring Andalee Banta, who is the Senior Curator at the Baltimore Museum of Art. She will discuss the BMA's exhibition, Making Her Mark, A History of Women Artists in Europe, 1400 to 1800. And you may remember that it featured several pieces of Madame Niep porcelain from Hillwood's collection, which are, of course, now safely back on view in the mansion. Tonight, we are so excited to hear from Francesca Cartier Brickell, who will take us on a journey through Cartier's history with natural pearls. But before I hand the mic over, I'll share a bit about Francesca, although I am sure that many of you are probably very familiar with her. She was an English literature graduate from Oxford University, and of course she's a direct descendant of the Cartier family. Her great-great-great-grandfather founded the world-famous firm in 1847. Her late grandfather, Jean-Jacques Cartier, was the last of the family to manage and own a branch of the firm that still bears their name. Her book, The Cartiers' Untold Story of the Family Behind the Jewelry Empire, which of course I know you know is on sale upstairs, is the result of years of independent research into her family and the business they founded, and it has been translated into many languages. Francesca, who lives in Oxford with her family, lectures about Cartier's illustrious history literally all over the world. Now please join me in welcoming Francesca Cartier Brickell.
Book launch here a few years ago, and yeah, I just love it, and some spectacular jewels here, as you know. Obviously, Marjorie Merriweather Post had one of the most spectacular collection of Cartier jewels, I think because she was a collector over many decades. I find it fascinating looking at her pieces because I think they reflect her own unique style, but also just changing fashions through time. So it's been really fun to dive into her history. Obviously today the focus is pearls. I went to the exhibition today, which was great. If you haven't, I really recommend it. And this is an exhibition, this is the talk that I've been wanting to give for a while, actually, because I love the history of my family in pearls, and I haven't ever given this talk before, so it's the first time. I hope you enjoy it. Right. So I just thought I'd start with, well, no introduction. Marjorie Merriweather Post, through time. And what was really fun preparing for this lecture and looking at photos was almost every photo she's wearing pearls. So it was so easy to find photos. And here you can see her through time. Obviously, she needs no introduction to you here. A fascinating woman. The more I researched, the more I was interested by her. But yes, today we'll be focusing on her jewellery. And first of all, though, I wanted to take you a bit back in time to pearls, the history of pearls a bit. So pearls have been incredibly valuable objects since ancient times. Almost 2,000 years ago, it was said by Pliny the Elder, the Roman historian, that the first place and topmost rank among all things of price is held by pearls. Their whole value lies in their brilliance, size, roundness, smoothness, and weight. There have been two pearls which were the largest in the whole of history. Both were owned by Cleopatra. And then he goes on to tell this legend of a wager between Cleopatra and Mark Antony. And they had a bet as to who could provide the most extravagant feast. And the story goes that after Mark Antony's enormous feast, Cleopatra quietly just takes one of her enormous pearl earrings from her ear, drops it into a glass of vinegar, waits till it's dissolved, and then drinks it. And the bet is won. She has won. This is one of the most valuable objects in the world, and she wins. And that's a story that's retold in this painting here by Cepolo in 1744, The Banquet of Cleopatra. And it's just one story, and who knows if it's true or legend, but it does at least highlight the value of pearls since those Roman times. There are other stories from ancient Islam about incredibly valuable pearls, or there are stories that Caesar was motivated to invade England for its supply of freshwater pearls from Scottish rivers. I think he'd have been a bit disappointed if that was the reason. And Caesar apparently also decreed that pearls were only to be worn above women of a certain rank. And so why were these pearls so valuable? They were valuable because they were so rare. They were only found at this stage in one part of the world, in the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Mannar, between India and Sri Lanka. And the yield was very poor, and that kept their value very high for many centuries. And then something changed in the 16th century when Christopher Columbus went to South America. For the third time, he discovered that local populations in Venezuela on the coast had discovered pearls. This triggered the Pearl Age, which was a pearl rush financed by Spain. And just to give you an idea of how many pearls they found in South America versus how many they had found before in the Persian Gulf, by 1527 there were 1,380 kilograms of pearls sourced from the New World versus just 175 from the Persian Gulf. So you see the enormous, suddenly not so rare. So this is an example of one of the pearls found there, the Peregrina pearl, which you may have heard of. It was found in Panama in 1513. It was brought over to Spain. It was gifted to the King of Spain, and then it stayed in the Spanish royal family for generations. And here it is worn by two Queens of Spain, Margaret of Austria, the Queen of Spain, in 1606 on the far left, and then Elizabeth of France, Queen of Spain, in 1625. And then 350 years later, it turned up at Sotheby's, and Richard Burton bought it for his wife, Elizabeth Taylor, as a rather special Valentine's Day gift. During their first marriage, he paid $37,000 for it. And here she is wearing it in a film, Anne of the Thousand Days. And I just thought I'd tell you a fun story. So on one occasion, the pearl went missing. And Elizabeth Taylor writes about this in her memoirs. And she writes, "At one point, I reached down to touch the Peregrina, and it wasn't there. I glanced over at Richard, and thank God he wasn't looking at me. And I went into the bedroom and threw myself on the bed, buried my head in the pillow and screamed. Very slowly and very carefully, I retraced all my steps in the bedroom. I took my slippers off, took my socks off, and got down on my hands and knees, looking everywhere for the pearl. Nothing. I thought, it's got to be in the living room in front of Richard. What am I going to do? He'll kill me, because he loved the piece. Then she says, she looked around and she saw the puppy playing with a bone. Except she realised that they didn't give their puppies bones. I just casually opened my puppy's mouth, and inside his mouth was the most perfect pearl in the world. It was, thank God, not scratched. So he bought the Peregrina at auction at Richard Burton for her, but then they decided they wanted to have it reset. And so they took it to Cartier in New York. And one of the designers at that time was Alfred Durante, who's here as an older man with me. Fortunately, he died a couple of years ago, but he was the most lovely, lovely man, full of amazing stories of that time. And he did the design for this new Peregrina pearl, and you could see, but she was heavily involved as well. Apparently she wasn't the easiest client to work with. And you can see her red writing, her notes on it as well, but he did the final piece, and he told me all about that. So that was really fun to see. So I talked about the value of pearls. And what was interesting is, pearls, diamonds, how much is their value linked to their rarity? And certainly in the 1870s, when diamonds were discovered in South Africa, that changed the value, the rarity, certainly, of diamonds versus pearls. So prior to that, diamonds had really just been sourced in India, of course, the famous Golconda mines, and among others, and in Brazil. But suddenly these diamonds were discovered in South Africa, and this is a great, fascinating kind of little newspaper report from the time, where people quoted saying, "I see diamonds from 20 to 60 carats every day." So you can see they suddenly weren't so rare anymore. And yet pearls were incredibly rare. And just to give you an idea how rare they were, so there was a French politician and writer, and he became linked to the Cartiers actually through marriage, the marriage of his son and Pierre Cartier's daughter. And he was called Paul Claudel, and he wrote about pearls. And I found this fascinating because I used to work in finance in the city, and I used to kind of study the financial markets. And he writes that when one perfect pearl was found in the Persian Gulf, it would send financial markets into a state of alarm, because suddenly this object could be valued more than anything else in the world. So everything else had to readjust. He writes, their appearance on the market depresses all other values. It alters rates of exchange and causes considerable alarm because operational stability is under threat. So I found that really interesting that, it's not the way we think of pearls today, but really they were considered the most valuable object in the world for the high quality ones. So it's around that time that the discovery of the diamonds in South Africa that the Cartiers come on the scene. As Kate said, Cartier was formed in 1846, but it was really not until the founder's 3 grandsons joined the business that it grew into an international firm. So some of you may know, this is, just briefly, this is a photo of my great-grandfather on the right, Jack. He was the youngest of the 3 brothers. His other 2 brothers are on the far left, and their father is in between them. And the reason I fell into this kind of family history was, I thought I'd just briefly share the story. Some of you may know, but on my grandfather's 90th birthday, which was about 15 years ago, he'd asked me to look for a bottle of champagne for him in his cellar. And I went down to the cellar to look for this champagne to celebrate, and I couldn't find the champagne, and I thought, I can't go up empty-handed. And I saw in the corner of the cellar an old box, and I thought, well, maybe it's in there. I moved everything off the box and discovered it was a brown leather trunk with the initials JC, which are my great-grandfather's initials. And I thought, well, it's probably not in here, but I want to know what is. And so I opened the trunk, and I was confronted with hundreds of family letters, which dated back a century or so, and they'd really told the story of my family and the business they had founded, and it's fascinating because it's, you know, we've just gone through a pandemic, which was so hard for the business, but so hard for businesses. But in that trunk were stories of 2 world wars, the Great Depression, pandemics, so many adversities, and how they'd, you know, pivoted their business and survived. So yeah, it blew me away, and that's why I wrote the book. But just as a brief outline, so these 3 brothers are really the ones who took it to an international stage. And Grandpa had told me the story of when they were younger, they'd wanted to turn their grandfather's quite small Parisian jewellery firm into the leading jewellery firm in the world. And they'd taken a map of the world and they literally divided it between them with a pen. And Louis, the eldest, because he was the eldest, said, right, I'm going to keep Paris. Paris is a capital of the world, as it was back then. And Pierre, the middle brother, the one on the far left, he said, okay, I'll take New York. They'd seen a lot of money coming from America, the dollar princesses coming over to marry, that bolster the British aristocracy. And Jack on the right, I don't think he was given much say in the matter, but he was given London, which is why I'm British. And with that went the British colonies, including India. So he travelled a lot to the east. And of the 3, actually, he's the one who became the most knowledgeable about gemstones. So on his travels, he bought a lot of gemstones. But starting in Paris, I like this story. So this photo, the sketch on the left is the sketch of Louis Cartier, the eldest brother. He's the one who stayed in Paris. And on the right, the portrait is of Alfred, his father. So the story, I was told this story by the elderly daughter of the first pearl stringer in Cartier, Paris. And because she was told it by her mother and she remembered it, so she passed it down to me. So when Cartier moved to Rue de la Paix in the very end of the 19th century, Alfred, who was still the boss because Louis had just joined the firm and, you know, was the younger son, Alfred decreed that there should be no women working in 13 Rue de la Paix. You know, that it was only the men who worked in that building. If there were any women, they had to work in the office over the road. And so the pearl stringer, Madame Ricot, she worked in the office over the road. When Louis came and he started working there, he thought, this is incredibly inefficient. We're carting these incredibly valuable pearls back and forth over the road every day. So he went to Madame Ricot and he said, can you come to work in 13 Rue de la Paix? And she said, no, monsieur, I can't. Your father has decreed that that's not allowed. And Louis said, just come over. He doesn't need to know about it. And Louis finds her a little office. Apparently it's like a broom cupboard under the stairs. And that's where she sets about pearl stringing. And apparently all is fine for some time until one day Alfred comes to the store and she's got up to, I don't know why, go and get a glass of water or whatever. And he hears a rustle of skirts. He's like, and he follows the noise and finds her. Says, what are you doing here? And she apparently burst into tears and said, oh, it was, you know, Monsieur Louis, he told me to come here. And Alfred storms into Louis's office, and apparently there's the most almighty row, which can be heard throughout the building. But in the end, Louis wins because she's allowed to stay. So that's the story of the first woman allowed to work in Cartier Paris. And just to give you a sense of Cartier's clients at the time and how important pearls were, I think it's so hard to explain how important pearls were for Cartier. Because they were so valuable, and you know the most important clients in the world wanted them, and there was a show of power, it was a show of wealth, it was a show of status. They were, my grandfather said, you know, the lion's share of Cartier's income. So it was just fun to show you some of the clients at the time. So on the left, we've got Grand Duchess Vladimir. She's there at St. Petersburg Palace Ball in 1903. Her headdress includes the famous Romanov emeralds, which Cartier would end up after the revolution. So many of these jewels were smuggled out of Russia, and Cartier would buy them back from their clients. And those emeralds were eventually made into a headdress, actually, for Barbara Hutton, Marjorie Maria's husband's niece, in several decades later. But you can see how many pearls she's also wearing, Grand Duchess Vladimir. The next one along we have Maharaja, the Gateway of Baroda, and his famous pearl necklace. Then there's Consuelo Vanderbilt, who married the Duke of Marlborough in 1895 when she received this historic pearl necklace. Doesn't look the most comfortable thing to wear, which reportedly belonged to Catherine the Great and Empress Eugenie. She says in her memoir, she said, my mother had given me all the pearls she had received from her father. There were 2 fine rows which had once belonged to Catherine of Russia and Empress Eugenie, and a sautoir which I could clasp around my waist. And then on the right we've got Queen Alexandra as well. So, and meanwhile, over in America, it's against this kind of pearl-laden backdrop that Marjorie Merriweather the Post comes on the scene, and I love this piece. This is like 1914 Cartier, New York, this hat pin. I think it's so modern the way she's wearing it there, so elegant with the pearl necklace, and quite fun, kind of abstract, early hints of Art Deco in this piece. So, meanwhile, over in London, Jack is selling a lot of pearls because debutantes, when they're presented at court, which is really the highlight of a young girl's life, and presented in front of the king and queen, there's a very strict dress code, white dress, everything is decreed what they can, even the length of the dress or the flowers they can have, and their jewels have to be very simple, and pearls are the perfect jewels for a debutante. So Cartiers advertise jewels in their stalls as pearls for your debutante daughters. So basically, all this to say that demand, there's far more demand than supply, and it's decided that Jack should go out to Bahrain in search of pearls, because at this time they were buying pearls from dealers who were coming to their countries with the pearls. So there were lots of middlemen in between. They weren't necessarily getting the best pearls. They weren't necessarily getting the best price for these pearls. So Louis tells his younger brother that he thinks he should go out to the Middle East, and there's a letter from this time where Jack writes back saying, "My dear Louis, if I have understood correctly, the most important mission bestowed on me during this trip to the East is to investigate the pearl market and to report back on the most effective way for us to purchase pearls." And it's quite an adventurous journey, really. You can see he's leaving the streets of Mayfair and Bond Street for boats. It's 3 weeks on a boat there. He's trying to learn the language with the help of a guidebook on the boat. And he gets there, but the problem is that, as the brothers well knew, someone had got there first. So these are the Rosenthal's, and they had famously had the main connection with the pearl sheiks in Bahrain, and Louis was furious about this. He said, these are Parisian brothers. He said, no, we need to be the Parisian brothers with this relationship with the pearl sheiks. Jack, you need to go and knock them off the top spot. So Jack's sent out. But there's a fun story of how the Rosenthal's had managed this, which I thought was very clever, actually. So the Rosenthal's had first bought pearls. They'd first gone out to the Middle East in 1905 to buy pearls. 2 brothers, Victor and Leonard. So apparently Leonard is the brains of the operation. Victor's the one who's sent out to buy the pearls. So he went out in 1905, and he came back with 187,000 rupees of pearls, which is about $1 million today. In 1906, he went out again, and he brought back double that. But in 1907, there was a financial slump, and all other jewellers slowed down on their purchases. But Leonard saw an opportunity. He persuaded a banker to lend him several million francs, and then he converted those francs into small half-franc silver coins. So you can imagine how many silver coins you've got if you've got several million of francs. And then he shipped them all out to his brother in the Persian Gulf. And the story goes that as the ship arrived, donkeys were sent, and the coins were put in the donkeys, baskets on the side of each donkey. And the donkeys went in a procession all the way up to Victor's house, and the sheiks apparently watched in amazement as a seemingly endless procession of donkeys with millions and millions and millions of gold or silver francs came up. And they were convinced that he was the richest man in the world, and from then on, this special relationship was born, and all the best pearls were the Rosenthal's for the asking. Very clever, right? And then the Rosenthal's then shipped the pearls back to Paris, and they had this enormous pearl business where they apparently employed 100 pearl stringers and made 100 necklaces a day. I don't know if that's true, but it was certainly an awful lot. So you can understand why Louis wasn't happy about that. So Jack went out and he went to go meet with the pearl sheiks. I love this photo. And it was all very new and unfamiliar to him. You know, he talks about how, you know, the food was unusual, and he had to get used to the culture there. And this is the photo that's since been colorized, obviously, but I love it. I had the black and white one big in my study as I was writing my book, actually. And I always thought, when I finish this book, I'm going to find out who those families are, and I'm going to try and track down their families, their descendants. And I did do that. I love Jack's kind of thinking of his white shoes. They're all in their bare feet and his like dapper white shoes, and and so I did. And so when my book was finished, with the help of people in Bahrain, I found out who those people were, and I went out to Bahrain and I met them. And my aim had always been to redo that photograph. And we did it. And it was so funny because I obviously didn't have a cigarette. I don't smoke. And someone was rushing around trying to find a cigarette. And everyone was trying to get the right costume. So it was really fun. But it was actually really moving because I realised that Jack had kept that photo, and he'd kept a lot of photos from the Persian Gulf, and he told his son, my grandfather, about those trips. So Grandpa had told me a lot about them, and it's obviously been a big part of his life. And what was really interesting was speaking to these families, that his trip out there had been a really big part of all their families' lives as well. And those stories had been passed down through their generation. And it was actually really, I get quite moving even think about it, because they brought all their families, they brought all generations, loads of cousins, there were so many people there, that it was just such an important, you know, connection for everyone. And it was amazing to have made that connection through the generations, that it kept, you know, that connection was still there. And it was great fun. When Jack was there, he'd asked to go out on the pearl fishing boats. I also did a bit. I tried to redo a bit of his photo album. So he went out on the pearl fishing boats, which was very unusual because apparently normally people came out to buy the pearls. They just wanted to buy the pearls. They didn't really care about the divers or how they found the pearls. But Jack wanted to understand the process, and he wanted to speak to the divers and check they were okay. Jack was a really good man. He wanted to actually become a priest, but his brothers had told him that no, that his duty was to their fraternal trinity rather than the holy trinity. But he was a lovely man, a spiritual man, and he was adored. The condolence letters on his death are just phenomenal. He was just adored by everyone. So he just wanted to check how these divers were, and he was given a donkey to get onto the boat because to not get those lovely white shoes wet. And I asked when I was going out, I said, do you think do they still have donkeys? And they said, I'm sure we could find you one. And look, even the ears are the same. Yes, it is. It's like the great-grandson. But obviously Bahrain's changed a bit in the background, as you can see. So anyway, Jack went out there, and this is him on the fishing boat with the Cartier pearl expert, Maurice Richard, next to him. And then their translator, Sethna, on the right, and the pearl sheiks on the left. And he wrote in his diaries, and he told my grandfather as well, about the process of the diving. And he said how it was a dangerous job. The divers had first put on nose clips, and they put on their leather finger protectors, and they put in earwax. And they put one foot in a stirrup weighed down with a stone, and the other foot in a basket weighed down with a stone. It pushed down to the ocean floor. And when they got down on the ocean floor, they kind of turned upside down, so they could scrabble around on the ocean floor with their hands, and they put the basket around their neck. So any pearls they could find, they would just put in the basket. And then when they were done, they would give the sign, and they'd be pulled back up. And they'd give the basket to the people on the boat, who would tip out all the shells, and then sort through the shells. And just to give you an idea, like Jack writes that on the morning he's there, they collected over 200 shells. It's a whole morning in the scorching sun. They collected over 200 shells, but they didn't find any pearls. So, I mean, the chance of finding a pearl, even a small pearl is quite hard, but to find a decent sized pearl is getting even harder. And then to make a necklace, you want pearls of the same colour, the same size or graduated size. Grandpa said it could easily take 10 years to make a necklace. That was normal. That wasn't. So when you realise that with these women wearing lots and lots and lots of pearls, just quite how, unusual that was. And but this I found really fun. So this was a Cartier London kind of advertisement for the time, and they've obviously used this photo from Jack's album, and they put it on it, and they've called themselves Pearl Importers, which is quite funny because actually they didn't manage to knock the Rosenthal's off the top spot. The pearl sheets, they would buy from them on this trip, but really they didn't ever form the same connection. But obviously the idea that they were telling their clients that they were getting these pearls from the source was an incredibly important marketing tool for them, in terms of building their reputation in the pearl business. So when I went out, I tried pearl diving too. And this is like a basket. This type of basket wouldn't have changed. That would be the same type of basket. So I did it in snorkeling, the shallow waters, and then I did the deep sea diving as well, as you can see. So before I'd gone out, this was quite interesting. I was asking about whether there were less pearls these days, because I'd heard that natural pearls are not around so much anymore, and that's partly because of global warming. I'd heard different rumours, and I was asking them about it. And they said, yes, there haven't been so many pearls found in recent years, partly because, the Middle East region started to invest more heavily in oil, and natural pearls were no longer such a big part of their economy. So pearls were not fished for so much. And now in recent years, Bahrain was saying they've opened up the pearl industry in the sense that they allow tourists or whoever comes, if they want to go pearl fishing, they can keep whatever they find without paying tax or declaring or anything. So that's encouraged more people to come there to fish. And as a result of that, they think they're now finding more pearls, partly maybe because people are looking around, they're aggravating the seabed a bit. Maybe that's helping the formation of pearls. So, which was I thought was interesting. Okay, and so there we go. Good question, because did I find any? So we did go through them in exactly the same way that they would have gone through them before. And this guy who was helping me go through them, so you open the shell and you have a look, and in the kind of mucousy part, he was amazing at spotting, and he would spot these tiny little seed pearls. I was like, really? Because they're so small and you can barely see it. He kind of gets it out. You kind of wipe it on your hand, and then you kind of open the next one and wipe it on. It kind of sticks on your hand with the mucus from the shell. And then, so we found a few very small ones, which I could take home. And then it was covered actually by CNN Arabic out there. They loved it, because I think that connection with Cartier and the pearl industry, I think it's still important to the country today, that Jack had chosen to go to Bahrain to find the pearls because he considered them being the best in the world, and that's something that they continue to be proud of today. So that was quite funny and very unexpected. So when Jack was there, after being on the pearl boat, he would speak with the sheiks and he would negotiate with them over some of the pearls, and he would buy some. And what was interesting is that one of the men he met, I met one of the ones who's in the photo, I met the descendant of, and they are still in the pearl business today. Yeah, this is really phenomenal, because you can see it's like multi-strand, I think it's 16 strand, natural pearls. And I said, how did you make that? So it's the Matar family, who, as I say, is still in the business today. And I said, how long did it take? And he said, generations.
Yeah.
Yeah. So while he was out in the Middle East, Jack also went to India on that trip, and he travels around looking for gems. Some to buy, some are not for sale. And he loves the gems in India. And I just thought this was quite fun. This is a picture of him looking at gems, I think, in a shop in Delhi. But he writes about one emerald that he finds here, and he says the emerald is of the form of a flat oval, and it has a Persian inscription, and it's a fine green colour. And I was talking today with Wilfred, and we were wondering whether it was actually this emerald that he's talking about finding here is this emerald that's in this famous Marjorie Merriweather Post's famous emerald brooch, the middle one, because it does fit the description. That'd be quite fun if it was the same one that he found here. Because he wrote this diary in 1926, and I think this was bought just after that in London in 1927, I think. So it could have been the same one, which is quite fun. So, as I say, he travels around and he goes to the shops, but he also visits and the bazaars, but he also visits the palaces. And he goes to the Palace of Baroda, where he's invited by the Maharaja. And the Maharaja there asks him to look at his jewels. And this is the one that Jack is most... He has amazing jewels, by the way, incredible diamonds. But this is the one that Jack is most blown away by, because Jack just adores natural pearls. And he appreciates how hard they are to find. And he said this one is, as you can see, as to the size, colour, the pearls are absolutely matchless. And it's about absolutely perfectly graduated Basra pearls, which are the pearls found in the Middle Eastern region. So yes, it's a 7-stranded pearl necklace. And also in Baroda, which has some fantastic pearls, is, I don't know how to press it again. Yes, there's this Baroda pearl carpet, which has over 1.5 million pearls. And it took 2 years to make. I'll give you a zoom so you can see. Yeah. And it's got different types of pearls. The Basra pearls, like the ones that were in the necklace from the... but also Baroque pearls and seed pearls. They say the total weight of the pearls is 30,000 carats. And it's also set with diamonds, silver, gold, rubies, emeralds, sapphires, everything, but the pearls are the star of the show. Meanwhile, over in New York, some of you may know this story, but I can't really talk about pearls and not mention this story. So Cartier opens a New York store in 1909, but it's a relatively small showroom on Fifth Avenue, not where it would later become. And Pierre Cartier wants to move to a bigger location, has been looking around for some time. And he has a double-stranded pearl necklace in the window of his showroom. And it's valued at $1 million, which makes it apparently the most valuable necklace in the world on sale at that time. And one of his clients, Maisie Plant, when she's quite young, she just married a much older, wealthier businessman, sees this necklace and apparently falls in love, and the story with it. And the story goes, what Maisie wants, Maisie gets. And Maisie spoke to her husband, and her husband, Morton Plant, became a very good friend of Pierre Cartier, actually. But at this stage, they're just meeting each other. And Morton Plant says to Pierre that he's thinking of selling his townhouse on Fifth Avenue, because Fifth Avenue had been residential, but it's becoming increasingly commercial. And Pierre says, well, why don't we do a deal? The necklace will fill the building. And that is what they do. And it is a deal. It's a particularly good deal. And there are great letters from that time that Pierre writes to his younger brother Jack saying, I'm so excited, we're starting French luxury in New York. I'm so excited about our future. We're tearing down walls. We're really making our future. You can just hear the excitement in his letters. And it's all because of that necklace. So Marjorie would have probably visited that Cartier store when it was newly refurbished, and obviously would go on doing so. And I love the story of how after her second husband, Edward Hutton, had lost lots of money gambling in a casino in Palm Beach, where Cartier later also had a store actually, she threatened to spend double it herself if he did it again. He did, and she bought a pearl necklace for $100,000. And I love that she says he went straight in the air like a geezer. He paid the bill. I never found that he was gambling as heavily again. And pearls, as I mentioned, they were because they were so expensive, and they were worn so regularly. I mean, really, photos of the day, everyone's wearing pearls. That it was advised that you should have your pearls restrung at least twice a year, because they were so, you don't want them to fall and break, and you were wearing them all the time. And often at home with a lady's maid keeping watch. So Cartier would send their pearl restringers out to the clients' homes, and the lady's maid would just watch over. Or you could bring them into store to be restrung. And I love this archive photo from Hellwood, where it just shows how each pearl is accounted for. It shows the size of each pearl for insurance reasons. But it's really interesting because also it's very hard to know which pearl, we were talking about this before, which pearl necklaces are Cartier. We don't know. Like, there are Cartier clasps, but over time pearl necklaces are changed, and long ones are made short, or short ones are combined together to make long ones. But this one kind of accounts for each pearl. So on the subject of ropes of pearls, yes. So this is Coco Chanel, whose lovers, like the Duke of Westminster and Grand Duke Dimitri, gave her some fantastic pearls. I love the story. There's a story of how, in a jealous rage, she was on the Duke of Westminster's boat in the south of France on the Med one time when she found out about another one of his affairs, and apparently she threw her pearls into the sea in a jealous rage. And whenever I'm down by the Med, I'm always like looking at her. But she loved pearls so much, she launched, she made fake pearls as well, and launched them in costume jewellery because she wanted ropes and ropes of pearls for everyone. She wasn't the first to create fake pearls. In 1480, apparently Leonardo da Vinci came up with a recipe, which was they made a paste using very small pearls, dissolved it with lemon juice, mixed it into powder form, and then binded it with egg white, and then finally polished the finished product to create a realistic pearl. That's because pearls were so valuable. They wanted to, create fake ones back then. So I thought I'd show you an example of wearing ropes of pearls in the 1920s. So this is a Harper's Bazaar advert. It's missing the writing underneath, but it was called The Prologue to Court. The jewels of Cartier Limited are mounted and set by British craftsmen on the premises at 175 New Bond Street. And so that was Cartier London advertising that they made their pieces in-house. And in June 1929, Post was presented at the court of King George V and Queen Mary, and she posed for this photograph, and then there's obviously the painting, wearing the gown, which she was received at Buckingham Palace, and of course these wonderful pearls, and that fantastic ring that I saw in the Smithsonian today, and but I love that, so elegant. And later on, we're talking about how pearls could be restrung and refashioned in different ways. Maybe some of the longer pearls were made into smaller necklaces as well, as fashions changed. And that changing fashion is a kind of an important factor of all of Cartier's jewels, of course. As Louis famously said, the jewel is the slave of the dressmaker, for does he not create for the dressed and not the undressed woman. And just to give you an idea of how different costumes could handle different jewels, we've got Post in Marie Antoinette costume here, which I love, but you can see how if you're wearing a big corset, you can have a big brooch on front of the corset. You can have a devant de corsage like this conch pearl brooch on the top left, which is actually in the exhibition, which is really interesting. I think those pink conch pearls, they come from the Caribbean conch shells, and I think what I understand is Post had the pearls and gave them to Cartier and asked them to reset into that brooch. But you can just see how different dresses work with different types of jewels, different hairdos as well. Whether it's the shorter ones and the devant de corsage for the more corsets, or the longer ones for the long silk dress. I still do not know how she is wearing that emerald brooch with that dress, and it is not pulling it down. It is a miracle. Okay, The Chair's pearls. So this is, I think, is like one of the peaks of the pearl market. 1920s. This is a fantastic story that these pearls, a set of pearls had been given to the Louvre Museum by Madame Chair. She had received her first few pearls from her husband on her wedding day. Her husband had been an older politician in France, and the husband and wife had a deal that whenever he received 50,000 francs from his broker, she was to be given 1,000 francs to spend on pearls. So over her life, she created an exquisite triple-stranded necklace of 145 perfectly matched natural pearls. It was considered one of the best in the world. When she died, she left it to the Louvre Museum on the condition that it would always be in the museum on display. But 40 years later, the necklace was said to be losing its colour and lustre behind glass, and the Louvre decided that it needed a pearl mother. These jewels needed to be loved. So then this search went on to find a pearl mother in Paris. And they found an actress, Lillian Greuze, who was chosen due to her velvety skin and even temperament. So every day, this actress had to turn up at the Louvre, and the pearls would come out to her with a security guard placed around her neck, and accompanied by policemen, she would ride down the Rue de Rivoli and onto the Champs-Élysées. And there, as it would, with the sunlight on her, there she and her pearls would sit at a little table in a famous cafe taking refreshment. Later, she would return to her apartment in her hotel opposite the Tuileries and spend an hour caressing and fondling the pearls. This is a quote from the magazines at the time. Holding them against her velvety cheek, whispering sweet nothings to them, loving them as a mother would her child. And after wearing them, they would be returned to their case in the Louvre, and this went on for several weeks, and then it was decided that these jewels had been saved, and now the Louvre wanted to sell them, but they weren't allowed to sell them because they'd been given on the condition they wouldn't, so they had to pass a law saying that they could be sold. Big auction. Cartier decided they really wanted to bid for these. But they wanted to do it secretly. And actually, it was Cartier in New York who wanted a big bid because it was a heritage piece, and they thought there was a lot of interest in the heritage pieces, particularly in America. And so each strand was auctioned off separately to begin with, and then all three strands were auctioned together at the end. And the idea is if the total is higher for the individuals, then it would go to the individual people, or if it's higher for the whole one, it would go to that person. So first of all, each strand and the clasp are all auctioned off individually, and the total is just shy of 11 million francs. And then the bidding opens for the whole thing together, and it reaches, absentee bidder, 11.3 million francs, which is the equivalent to more than 7 million today, $7 million. And no one knew who the buyer was, but later that month it was announced that it had been Cartier, and they set up a little exhibition, first of all, on 13 Rue de la Paix, as a shrine for the precious pearls, where the public passed in an almost death-like silence. And then in an interview, one of the salesmen, Jules Glesner, said that the Prince of Wales, the Queen of Spain, and the Queen of Romania had all examined the three strands of perfectly matched pearls. But when he was asked if they were potential buyers, he said, "No, they are too poor. The governments may buy them as crown jewels, but the monarchs are not as rich as they once were," which is why they were sent over to America. This is the kind of invitation to come and see the pearls in America in Fifth Avenue. You paid $1, I think it was, and the money went to charity. And apparently thousands visited it. And they were sold, so it was said, to the anonymous wife of an American millionaire. But what we do know is that in Cartier's centenary in 1947, some of these pearls would feature in different pearl necklaces. So they were obviously broken up over time. So that was a peak. If that was a peak, this is the worst thing that happens to Cartier. Culture pearls. Mikimoto, the son of a noodle seller, he started off by selling noodles, ended up kind of experimenting with cultured pearls. It took him many decades, but in time created these pearls which people couldn't tell the difference of from real pearls. And he brought them to Paris to the 1925 University exhibition when the Parisian jewellers started to get really worried. Cartiers and the Rosenthal's, these arch enemies who had both been in the Persian Gulf, actually joined forces and said, we've got to stop and we've got to make sure he classifies them as cultured pearls, because no one knows the difference, and our clients are buying them. He's selling them at a big discount. In 1927, he came over to America and he met Thomas Edison. And Edison apparently said in the press, "This is a real pearl." And the press went, it was viral for those days. And it was really, really damaging to Cartier. The value of natural pearls fell by 85% when you think that over 60% of Cartier's income was pearls. It was devastating. And yeah, there was another article in 1985 I found which said in the 1920s there were over 300 natural pearl dealers. By the 1950s we were down to 6, and now none.
Well,
and yet Cartier never used cultured pearls. The brothers, Grandpa told me they didn't like them. They liked natural pearls. They liked the fact that they were a bit imperfect. They wouldn't use cultured pearls. So this is a really interesting necklace. So I love this advert and this scene and the necklace. So in the 1930s, it became fashionable to wear a lower-backed dress and to have the clasp coming down the back, which is so elegant. That's the 1935 Harper's Bazaar advert. And Post in 1936 ordered this necklace, which is also in the exhibition, and spectacular. And what I found really interesting was this necklace was first of all made with natural pearls, but then in 1936, but then in 1963, it was changed, and it was cultured pearls replaced the natural ones. And whether the natural pearls were made into other necklaces, I don't know. But anyway, I think it's really beautiful and an interesting example as well of. I thought that was an interesting example of how pearls took the centre stage at the front, whereas diamonds were just at the back. Okay, so I am coming to the end. So the pearls, this Grace Kelly, the pearl is the queen of gems and the gem of queens, and just quite fun to show you pearls on Queen Elizabeth. Yeah, and there she is wearing the Williamson brooch as well, which was made under my grandfather and cut by Cartier London, but always in pearls as well. Princess Anne and Prince Charles. And this is just a fun story I thought I'd tell you. So on my travels, I spent about 10 years researching this book, and I went all over the world. But some of the people I met were the descendants of those who had worked at Cartier. And one of them was a great grand vendeur, the big salesman in Cartier Paris. And he had the most important clients, including the Duchess of Windsor and Barbara Hutton. And apparently there was they were both a bit territorial about him. They wanted, they couldn't have meetings of them, next to each other. And so Barbara Hutton, and they became good friends. And Barbara Hutton apparently gifted him one of her beautiful pearl necklaces for his wife. They became close. They were friends, and his wife would wear this necklace non-stop. And he told me the story of how one day they were going to dinner with the Duke and Duchess of Windsor and the Bois de Boulogne, and he said to his wife, "You have to take off your pearl necklace this evening." She's like, "But why? This is a big dinner." And he said, "Because it's the only necklace in Paris that's better than the Duchess of Windsor's." She's not going to like it. Sorry. There we are. I just thought coming to an end now, but thought, through the ages, different fashions, different countries, different times, pearls are always appropriate, and it's just really fun to see how they're worn in different ways, but how they lift. My mother said that her mother and grandmother were never without pearls. It just lifted them. I just thought fun to show some of the Cartiers and pearls. In the middle, my great-grandparents in India, in Jamnagar, with the little princess. For years, I was trying to track down the person that I thought was little prince in that photo. And I spoke to a lot of people in India, and no one really knew. And then recently I found out, and I spoke to her, and unfortunately she died quite recently, but she was a princess of Jamnagar. And I said, "Tell me about the photo then." She said, "It was my 5th birthday. We always had birthdays outside there. You can see the table laid behind for the big birthday lunch." And So she was the daughter of the Maharaja. And I said, yeah, but when I spoke to the other families, the other people I knew in India, they said it looked like a boy's costume. She said, yes, but my parents really wanted a boy, so they So for years I've been trying to track down this boy, but it was a girl. So anyway, so there's Nellie, my great-grandmother on the right, and her pearls, and this on the right is Jackie, who was a Hungarian countess who married Louis Cartier, and there she is photographed for Vogue in her pearls. And on the left, Pierre Cartier, who ran New York, that's his wife and his daughter, Alma and Marion, in pearls as well. Always, yeah, again, it's hard to find photos of them without pearls. So that does basically bring me to the end. I just wanted to show how they're wonderful, because they're passed down the generations. Nothing can be added to pearls to make them more beautiful except a beautiful woman, was what Jules Cleanser, the big Cartier salesman in New York. And so, yes, and then that does bring me to the end. This is a photo of me, like when I went to Bahrain, I went to one of the jewelry shows there, and that saw some of those pearls, natural pearls, close up. They had different bowls of different size pearls. They'd arranged by size and colour, and they are exceptional. And I think I've got a real newfound appreciation for pearls, not only diving and realising how hard it is to find them, but also just seeing they are so beautiful, and they do lift. You can see why they were so popular. They lift the face, they lift the complexion, and and I hope that I think they are. So that building that I told you, the New York building, and the necklace, which both went for $1 million. When cultured pearls came on the scene, that necklace, it had been worth $1 million. When Maisie died and it was sold at auction, it went for $151,000. And obviously the building went, who knows? So that was probably the best trade of the 20th century. But natural pearls, I think, are now kind of coming back again, and people are valuing again. And I think when you do see them close up, you can get the opportunity to see them, and they are so special. So there we are. That brings me to the end, and I don't know if we've got time for questions, but if we do, I'm very happy to take them.
Thank you. Obviously, Thomas Edison was a huge celebrity when he was presented with this question, but why still would anyone have thought that he, of all people, would be someone to tell whether it's a real pearl or not?
Yeah, good question. I think also he was an inventor, and this was like an invention, and it was the most perfect. I don't know. He was very excited, but he was a big celebrity at the time, and he was interviewing for this. He was doing an interview with him for this press article. I don't know. So it made the front page. Yeah.
Testing. I was just wondering, when during your research, what were some of the critical approaches you had to when you were doing your research for your book? How did you come about analyzing these jewels and being able to understand their significance and how they worked into the greater picture of your ancestors? That makes sense.
Yeah. I don't know. The research is a funny thing, because you get nuggets in different places, and we were just talking before how it's hard to sometimes, well, especially pearls are really hard because you can't really trace a particular pearl. You've got a big sapphire of a certain size, you can kind of trace that through time. But no, but it's hard, and you don't always know that you're in the right place also, because, how do you trace a stone through time? You might be looking at their weight. And so my great-grandfather went a lot to Sri Lanka and India, and I followed in his footsteps, and I went to the same jewelry dealers, and he'd sketched, when he was there, he'd sketched in his diaries the sapphires he'd found, and he'd sketched them with the different sizes. So sometimes when something comes up at Sotheby's and it's a big sapphire, and I'll go back to the diary and I'll be like, is that the same one that he found back then? But it's not always exactly the same, and you don't know if that sapphire's been cut over time, or if actually the weight back then wasn't as precise as it is now. So it's not that easy, but you make your best guess. It's really fun, though. It's really fun.
Thank you.
pearl market broadened to Asia, which, you know, the pearl divers and all of that I think of. Did that ever come into the Cartiers? The pearls that were used?
The more cultured pearls from Japan, or
No, I mean, they have real pearls.
but different, yes. So I think the Cartiers really liked. My grandfather was saying that his father and the Cartiers, they used the pearls in the Persian Gulf. That for them was the right natural pearls to use. Whatever stone they used, they always tried it to make it the best quality stone they could find of that size. Or even when the Great Depression hit and people couldn't afford precious gems anymore, rubies, sapphires, emeralds, diamonds, they then went to semi-precious gems. Aquamarine, for example, in London, they did a lot of that. But they used the best quality aquamarine, so it was less expensive than the higher quality than the rubies and sapphires, but still the best of what they could get. And I think within pearls, they thought the best, they would only use the best.
So, with the advent of cultured pearls, I'm guessing that it meant that a lot more people who were not quite as well-to-do as many of these people could now afford pearls.
Yes.
And so, did that lead to a significant increase in the sales of pearls? And also, what would be the relative value, cost of a natural pearl versus a cultured pearl?
Yes, a lot less. I think at the beginning he put it on at a 25% discount or something, so it wasn't enormous. But then because it took actually him quite a long time, Mikimoto, to create a perfectly round cultured pearl. It wasn't instant, so when he did do it, it had been a lot of work. But then I think they were able to enlarge the process and the farms where they did it, and then suddenly it's supply demand, and when you have a lot, you're able to create a lot more, then the price comes down. So over time it came down a lot. Yeah. I mean, if you can see, the natural pearl market fell by 85%, so you can see, I think there was a time when they weren't valued, people didn't distinguish between the two. They weren't, if they're not labeled differently, then he was forced to label them after a time, to label them cultured pearls. But the Cartier said by then the damage had been done, and it had become widespread, and people they had them and they didn't really care, and they thought it looked good and whatever. So, but yeah, he did have to label them after a while.
How does one tell the difference between pearls, or where they're from, or whether they're a cultured pearl or a natural pearl?
Yeah, if you want to see cultured pearls and natural pearl, go to the exhibition, because there's a natural pearl and the cultured pearl together, and you can really see. No, it's really interesting to see that, because I hadn't really seen them side by side. And I think in terms of the region, I mean, here they had bowls of different ones from different regions, and you could really see, but because they'd done it like that, if you were just to see one on its own, it would be very hard. But I think that's what Grandpa always said. They said it, for his apprenticeship and his father's apprenticeship, how they learnt about stones was by sorting. That was what they had to do for 3-year apprenticeship. You had to just, every morning you're sorting rubies, you're sorting emeralds, sorting sapphires, whatever it is, one stone at a time. You're sorting it by colour, and tone and shape, and only by then just seeing a lot of them. Because now, of course, you have the GIA, you can test pearls. When I went to Bahrain, they've got a huge testing facility, so they can tell exactly where one is from, not only if it's cultured or not, but where it's from. But they didn't have that all back then, so it was literally just Grandpa just said there's no shortcut, you just have to put in the time, and the more you see, the more you get. I mean, Grandpa did always, and his grandfather carried these master stones around with them, a perfect emerald, a perfect sapphire, perfect ruby. So wherever you are in the world, say you're in an Indian bazaar and it's a bit dark, and you can't, you need to compare what they're trying to tell you is a perfect one. Not. If you don't have a comparison, you can't really do that. So, because you see things in different lights, but yeah, I think I'm not an expert in that. I haven't dedicated those hours to it. But you see people who have, and they just know. Yeah, these men who spent time, doing it for generations.
I'm going to jump in with a question from Zoom really quickly. Someone would like to know, what type of fabric do you think best complements pearls?
Oh, gosh. Now there's a question. Yeah, I mean, those silk dresses was pretty good, weren't they? I mean, what?
The one you have on.
Yes, the one you have on. Yes, very good. Very good. Yeah, I'll go with that. I don't know. It's hard. They have in Bahrain, they say the reason the flag is the red and white is because like the pearls are enhanced by the red, you know. That's it, the combination together sets them off. So it's meant to be. You can see all the pearls are always shows on red. So maybe something
I
red.
loved your story about the female pearl stringer having to work in the broom cupboard. I'm wondering about how did your family find the talent to be the designers and to be the actual workers? I mean, you have to have talent as designers, but also be very trustworthy and other attributes. How did they go about finding their talent to work in their stores and their
generally
shops?
like across? Yeah. I mean, I think that's really interesting. Like when Louis Cartier joined the firm, apparently that was the first time that he wanted to have this Cartier style, so they had to hire a team of designers, because prior to that his father and grandfather had bought in jewels from elsewhere and sold them more like a retailer. And so he'd hired a team of designers, but he'd wanted to bring something new to jewellery, so he didn't hire jewellery designers. He'd hired designers in lacework or pottery, or his top designer was actually a balcony designer. And you know, he hired people who had a beautiful aesthetic sense. He used to always say, go onto the streets of Paris, but don't look in your competitors' windows. Look up, be inspired by like the doorways or carvings, or so that was interesting. But also these craftsmen and the jewelry designers, and this was the same actually even at the end of my grandfather's time, even some of the men I'm still in touch with today who are now retired, their apprenticeship was 7 years. They were working under a master, either a setter, a mounter, a polisher. You chose your trade. You weren't a master of all trades, so you were an absolute specialist in your trade. And you spent, and the designers, one designer I spoke to in London, he said he was so excited to get the job, and he'd gone in on his first day and he'd drawn something, and my grandfather said, yes, it's very good, but it's not quite Cartier. Maybe come back, see how you are next week. And he'd gone away and come back and come up with something else. It's still not quite Cartier. And apparently this had gone on not for weeks, but for years. And like only 3 years after, he'd walked in, and his wife was there when he was telling the story. And she said, I still remember the day he walked home that day. He was like, I got it. I finally got it. And so it's not like they hired them knowing these skills. They had to learn it. And they had to learn it from Cartier. And actually, this was really interesting as well. All the craftsmen I spoke to who came from other places, they all said they almost had to relearn. They had to relearn the mounting was done differently, the setting was done differently. There was a Cartier way of doing everything. So, yeah.
We have time for one more question in person. Well, if there's no more questions, thank you so much. Let's give a big round of applause to Francesca.